Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Marketing Share podcast. I'm Alec Cheung, and with me is Barb. How's it going?
Hey, Alec, how are you?
Hey, good. Today's topic is another take that we're taking here at measurement and attribution. I know we've had a few guests already on this topic, but we're kind of coming at this from a few different angles because this is kind of a big shift in marketing, right?
Yeah, actually, people are talking about the dreaded cookie collapse and, the privacy war is winning. So
Yeah.
therefore the marketing tracking is losing in some cases. So there's a lot of, I would say, concerned marketers out there about what attribution is going to look like moving forward. And, without, the clickability that we used to have, without the cookies that we used to have in some cases, where do we turn to make smart decisions and measure our work?
Right, right. And as you were saying that, it occurred to me that even though there's an attribution angle on this, but as we've heard before, even if you're not specifically measuring attribution, this still matters because it's affecting how digital marketing has been done in the past. We really have to shift. I think what's really interesting is that our guest today, Jeff Greenfield with Provolytics, excuse me, is going to talk about like what this shift is and how it's really a return to how things used to be before, right?
Yeah. Jeff is really an expert in this field. He's been in this marketing and measurement field for decades now. And he's currently building the next generation of AI attribution as co-founder of Provolytics, as you're right, which is cookieless attribution and measurement solution. And I like this solution because it's media agnostic, right? So when you were in the TV world, it seemed like everything you were measuring was favorable to television. In Google world, many would argue much of what you measure in your marketing is favorable to Google. So
Yeah.
I like the fact that his business is really media agnostic, and it's really about trying to get at pure measurement across both digital and traditional channels.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be a good conversation, very informative, kind of probably deep into some stuff. But I think this is something that marketers really do need to get. You need to get this because at a big picture level, it affects how you're going to be thinking about your campaigns and what you can expect. So,
Yeah, it's a
anyway,
big departure for digital marketers,
yeah,
actually.
yeah,
So kind of back to the future-ish. All
right.
right, let's get started.
All right, yeah, let's go talk to Jeff.
Jeff, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your career journey and the impetus behind starting the company.
Hey, Barb and Alec, thanks so much for having me today. It's wicked exciting to be here to talk about my favorite subject, attribution. This goes back to that old age problem of half the money I spend in advertising is wasted. The only problem is I don't know which half. I mean, this has troubled advertisers for, since the beginning of advertising. And prior to Provolytics, I started one of the first multi-touch attribution companies, a company called C3 Metrics. It was all based in the early days of the internet, started in 2008. It was all about collecting big data. So we would add tags to the website, tags to all the ads, and we were collecting hundreds of billions of data points every single month, primarily for large enterprise clients, and worked great, was phenomenal. I exited there in 2019 and thought I would never go back to measurement. I'd done my 12 years. I was done. Didn't know what I was going to do next. And then all of a sudden, there were all these weird changes that happened in the world of advertising technology. And essentially, it invalidated everything that I had done before. And I realized that we needed to create a new way to get to those same answers of which half is not working and really what should I do next. And that led to me jumping back into measurement again and building out Provolytics a couple of years ago.
Yeah. I feel like my entire career has been trying to connect the dots between what activities, what marketing channels we're doing, and what is really resonating with those customers. And wow, what a dilemma attribution has been, especially when you combine digital and traditional methods, right, together. Trying to come up with that picture holistically is really challenging. So talk a little bit about how the company kind of attacks that issue.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough thing, is to understand how do all these things kind of work together. And I think to really understand it, we kind of have to go back a bit to before digital to see how we were solving it back then. Because before digital, we primarily had TV, print, radio, direct mail, but we couldn't actually connect the dots. I think one of the things that we've as marketers gotten spoiled with is this concept that you can deterministically determine every step that somebody took to get from the first impression all the way through. But the reality is you can't, we're not wired into people's brains. You can't really actually figure out which was the point at which they made their decision. So before digital, before we even had that concept, we used a combination of math and statistics to look at things. And we use this concept. The basic bedrock of advertising was based upon the concept that we buy advertising to build awareness. And the way we do that is we're buying eyeballs, and we call those media impressions. And we build awareness, and we know that once we build awareness at a certain level, people will come into your store. This is before the internet, primarily retail. That would lead to people walking in and buying your stuff. And so we built out measurement methodologies, primarily marketing mix modeling, that looked at the relationship between how many impressions were in market, how much money we spent, and our actual sales. And that's how brands like PepsiCo, Nokia, Colgate, this is how these big international brands have grown. And they use marketing mix modeling to kind of set their budgets. And really what it tells them is it says, hey, in order to get your sales to this level, you need to spend 5% more in direct mail and this market with this type of messaging. And that was the level of detail that it would do. But it was a big, heavy duty math project. And that's really what excited marketers when digital came around, because with multi-touch attribution, we could kind of get to the same answer, but we could do it at a granularity that would enable them to do their job better. Because let's say I'm somebody buying paid search. I don't live in the world of my budget went up 3%. I live in the world of campaign ad group keyword match type. That's where I live. I live in the details. And that's what digital is all about. And with multi-touch attribution, we could specifically tell them, hey, this keyword match type is doing well. This one is really sucking wind. Cut it a bit more. And so as a result, marketers got all excited about MTA, which is what we called it, because in advertising, we love our acronyms. I mean, that's what we live for, is acronyms. We like to create new ones every month, it seems like. And then when we ran into all of these problems with privacy and everything, which I'm sure we'll get into a bit more, that kind of started removing the ability to be able to get down to that granularity. It kind of moved things more from deterministic to more probabilistic. And that led to a lot of folks like us looking at saying, hey, is there something in between marketing mix modeling and multi-touch attribution, kind of in the middle, where we can get the best of both worlds? And that's been our approach. But the way, going back to your original question about how we are able to look at digital and traditional media together, the key to that is having a unifying metric, something that is the same across all of them. And before digital, we used, GRPs, which are essentially media impressions. Digital, with like Google Analytics, is a click-based methodology. And that's what 99% of marketers are on. They're living in the click-based world, which worked fine, even though we know it wasn't the best approach. But the problem that folks have run into, and this is where the big conflict comes in, is that there is now this emergence of these non-click digital channels. Like we're on a podcast advertising. There's nothing to click on. CTV, there's nothing to click on. digital out of home, nothing to click on. So how is it that we can convince CMOs to invest dollars? Actually, it's not CMOs. They know that stuff works. How can we convince finance and the CFO to allow us to invest dollars in something that we cannot measure using clicks? And so the unifying metric that we're back to now is the impression. It's what we used before digital, because all of digital ads can all go back to impressions. So it all kind of combines. So our unifying metric is impressions. So that allows us to combine things like paid search with your display advertising, with your Meta, your social, your TikTok advertising, your influencers, with traditional linear television, satellite, radio, everything, and combine it all together. But the key is having that unifying metric, which most marketers are like, oh, when I think of impressions, I think of view throughs, and I think I'm getting screwed over by the publisher. Why would I go view throughs? But the reality is that impressions are what you're buying, not clicks.
So then if we're back to impressions, does that get impacted by now that we've gone cookieless? How do you measure impressions without that aspect of having cookies?
That's a great question, because the key is that measuring impressions is you have to have kind of a trusting relationship with the publisher you're dealing with. And a lot of that has to do with the verification companies that are out there, like Double Verify and IAS and some of the others, where you're actually validating this was a valid impression that was served. So you don't actually need cookies in order to do that. But cookies, you're right, they did serve a huge function in the advertising technology model. It's how, at my former company, how we were able to string together impressions to clicks and build out that essentially that trail, if you would, of every single impression and every single click. And what's happened, and this kind of leads to that whole privacy thing that occurred, and it really all started with GDPR in the EU. And, just to give some background on that, is essentially what happened in the European Union is they said to all of these companies, because ad tech has essentially been untethered, if you will. It's been allowed to kind of just roam on its own. It's like the wild, wild west. And whenever we see that happen, we see things kind of move so far in a direction. And there were companies that were built up just upon building up these cookie preferences. So they would know, Alec, let's say that you like cigars and you drive a Volvo. They would know this level of detail on you, and they would know your Volvo is leased and is going to come up for expiration in 6 weeks from now. I mean, that level of detail. And the EU said, that's great that you guys did that up to this point, but we're going to change the rules. The rules now are, if you have a list of people with preferences, that list no longer exists. You have to get rid of that list. You can rebuild it, but you have to ask people permission to opt in. And when that occurred, a lot of companies that were from the US, they left the EU and they said, yeah, we're out, we're gone. Right. And then that led in the US to some privacy laws like the CCPA in California that said, hey, that's a little too drastic for us in California. If you have a list, that's fine, you can keep it, but you need to allow people to ask, what information do you have on me? I want to see it all. I want to fix things on it. And if I want to be removed, you have to take me off the list. And that seems to be kind of the law of the land at this point in the US. But for a lot of companies like Apple that operate all around the world, they kind of saw the writing on the wall and they started making some changes. And the big change with iOS and Apple is, it turned out that apps that you have on your phone could track your usage across all other apps and then create this list of, like that Volvo list I talked about with the cigars, and then resell it. And you had no idea. So Apple then said, hey, guess what? Next time you do an update of the app, it's going to ask, do you want the app to track you? And people said, I'm not going to opt into that. No. And so that kind of killed tracking on iOS. And then on the Safari environment, third-party cookies, which are the cookies primarily for tracking, those haven't worked for a real long time. So folks have been using digital fingerprinting, and that's kind of a game of whack-a-mole for the companies. They've been cutting down on that. Firefox got rid of third-party cookies a while ago. Google threatened to get rid of them a long time ago, but because of all of the movement and what's gone on, a lot of companies are now realizing, hey, cookies really haven't been as reliable as we thought they were. It's kind of been like, the emperor's not wearing any clothes type of situation. We all kind of put our belief in it. We believed that they worked, but nobody validated it. And so we're realizing now that cookies really weren't the best way. They're actually not a good way forward, because eventually they're not going to be working as well as they are. The best way is to validate, have people log in and opt in. And also, what we also realize from a measurement perspective is that the more in the weeds we get, we can't see the big picture. And there's some great research from another measurement person out of the UK, a gentleman by the name of Orlando Wood, who's written a series of wonderful books that's shown that as the measurement has gone more granular, marketers have shifted dollars from the upper part of the funnel down to the bottom part of the funnel, which means as a result, if you think of a funnel, as you move down funnel, it's smaller. So they're spending more money, reaching less people, and scratching their heads and wondering why their advertising isn't working as well as it used to.
Mm.
And it goes back to that original thing. We're not buying clicks, we're buying eyeballs, we're buying impressions. And as we target more, our costs go up and we're reaching fewer people. And that's why we're now starting to see a lot of larger brands are starting to say, this lower funnel stuff, we need to be there, but but not to forsake our upper funnel branding activities.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the lower funnel, I think the logic for going there is that it's the higher probability to buy, right? You're closer to the end. So the theory, I think, is that it's worth spending the money there because the chances of you converting are higher. So I can kind of see that, but at the same time, you'd still need to bring in leads through the top of the funnel. And I think that's where, for me at least, all the shifts and the changes, I think it has messed up that part, right? Or it's confused. It's people are now, what was very well known before is more confusing now.
Well, you're right, because everything now, if you have a hot product, it's like overnight you have competition.
Yeah.
And then you're in a price war type of thing, no matter what. We see this happen with products that like take off, they're on Amazon, and then there's a million competitors selling it at half the cost. And the only way you can compete is not by cutting your price. You're going to lose on that. It's all about brand preference. It's when someone gets lower funnel and they're ready to buy, yes, you have to be there. But if they already know your name and they know about you and they feel good about you, and this is the other thing that digital marketers forget. They think that buying is all about being in the right place to sell stuff. They forget this emotional component to advertising. And the job of advertising is to influence, in that 99% of the decisions to actually buy are not consciously made. They're made emotionally inside. And it's that influencing. It's those ads, when I was growing up, the ones that, the stupid soap ads where you're crying because it's like so emotional. They tell a great story. And that's really what's missing from marketing and advertising today, is that look at me jumping all over the place.
Yeah, I totally hear you. I lived in the world of, the Pizza Hut, the Coca-Cola, the GRP, the TRPs, right? And, it used to be how many impressions would you need to see, right, before you actually take action? That's what we studied a lot. But then when you move into digital, of course, everybody was all about the clicks, right? And now cookies. And I've heard you actually say, Jeff, that this quarter will be a cookieless quarter, right? This buying season. So like, if cookies are not as important as we ultimately thought, what does that mean for companies this quarter?
What it means is that the reliance on cookies, they're still there. They're not really going away, but the number of places where you'll actually be able to access them is less and less. So it's kind of like if you think about your brand and you think about who your end customer is, if those people, any of those customers carry iPhones with them, that's cookieless. That your ads that are reaching them not through cookies, but through cookieless technology. And so you start to have to think about who is my end purchaser? Where do they live? And then you also start to think about the emerging technologies like connected television, which we're starting to see more and more. Amazon Prime just, opened up their inventory and doubled their inventory just in the last couple of weeks. So more and more of these ads are starting to get there, and we're starting to see more emerging brands utilize them because the power of television, and this is what's funny, is that the same people that are selling CTV and saying it's so powerful, just 5 years ago, were saying TV sucks, digital is where it's at. And so it's funny. But the reality is when someone is sitting there and they're about ready to watch a movie or something and an ad comes on and it's well put together and stuff, there's just something about how it just goes into the brain and it gives someone a feeling saying, hey, they're a good company. I can trust them type thing. It's very powerful.
Okay, so real simple question then. What is the replacement for a cookie today?
The replacement for the cookie there's really no individual replacement. I think the biggest replacement is a new paradigm in marketing, which is the understanding that you will no longer be able to target individuals anymore. This is the new world that we're living in. And for marketers who are digital natives, this is giving them a complete connection fit. They have no idea what they're doing. My daughter, for example, who's in the business, she got her start working at a large auto dealer group running their marketing. And I remember, they were heavy into Facebook, and she was like, Dad, this is great. I can go on and I can find Ford F-150 leaseholders whose lease is about to expire in 3 months and target them specifically for a truck we're selling. And I'm like, that's unbelievable. And as any marketer will tell you these days who buys heavily on Meta, every week when they log in, there's a red banner that says, hey, this campaign is going to be ending because the targeting criteria are no longer available. And so what's happened is that we are being forced to move up funnel. And that is freaking folks out because they were led to believe that the way to win is to target as much as possible. So really, it's all about, we're moving it's like Back to the Future. It's all about demographic, program. You have to start thinking about, okay, it's like this. If I'm targeting men and women who are over the age of 50 in the US, should I be on Snapchat? No, they're not there. Should I be on TikTok? No. Where are these people? They're on Meta. That's where they are. Okay. It's kind of like in the old days, like, all right, Love Boat. Who watches Love Boat? What is their demo? It's that type of thing. Yeah. But 20-year-olds are not on Facebook. 20-year-olds are on TikTok. So you have to think about, we have to do these tough marketing activities. You have to sit down and say, our customer is Lisa. She is 32 years old. She's divorced. She lives in New York City. She has a cat and 2 dogs. So we have to kind of come up with these personas and then start to think about where are these people spending their time? And that's where we should be buying. That's the replacement for the cookie, if you will.
I got to tell you, so privacy's win is the digital marketer's loss, I guess. And then I hear us back to the futuring a little bit. This reminds me of, you do a buyer persona and then you look at where they're spending time and where their eyeballs are at. It's very much media old school. And it does kind of frighten me about impressions, right? Because that was kind of a softer metric that we used to think about, right? But if it is the consistency one now, that's where you have to live, right?
It is, and I don't think this is marketing's loss. I think this is a huge win for marketing. I also think it's a huge win for those of us with gray hair. It reminds me of Y2K. Y2K, the world was going to fall apart because they never programmed the machines to handle, anything past 2 digits for the year. And they had to bring back all of these COBOL programmers who had since retired because no one was programming in it to fix all the machines so the world didn't fall apart. And you walk into a lot of ad agencies today, and it's a lot of younger folks in their 20s and 30s who have no idea, like, what is it like to create personas? what is this thing, impressions, that type of thing. And what I tell folks is that, especially for smaller brands, what should I do? How should I look at this world? And it's like every brand, even large or small, there's like a Google sheet that's got every single day of the last year, where how much you spent, how many clicks you got, what was your cost per click, how many sales you made, what was your cost per sale, what was your return on ad spend, that type of thing. But missing from that sheet is impressions. And what I tell people is kind of the DIY approach here is to add a new column and go back for the last year and add up all of the impressions every single day. Yeah, I know it's a pain, but it's so worthwhile, because what you're going to see is you're going to see days where you heavied up on impressions. You're going to notice there's going to be a lag. But you're going to notice that sales probably went up and even clicks went up a couple of days, sometimes even a week or two thereafter. And you'll start to see the relationship between impressions and then clicks and then sales. And you'll start to realize there is this time to conversion. And then you'll start to experiment. Let's try a new campaign, but let's not kill it after 3 days. If it's not working, let's let it run 7 to 10 days and see what happens. Some of our clients, the time that it takes from when they put a new ad out there and people from awareness all the way through to purchase can be over 30 to 45 days. So a lot of times you're just sitting on your hands waiting for the ads to actually have an impact and see what's going on.
Right. You mean people make decisions not in a vacuum? Like they see certain things in life, they experience things and then act on them, right? Go figure. We'll talk about the new tools, right? So we've maybe lost a few tools, but now we have some new tools with AI. Talk about how that you're incorporating AI now in as some new armor here for this work in attribution.
Yeah, AI is great because it allows us to speed up a process that would take normally a lot of time. For us at Provolytics, we actually, my theme here, I guess, for today is going to be back to the future, because the techniques we use are old school techniques. We use this thing called Bayesian, which is a formula that's been around since the 1700s, oddly enough. But it's leading a lot of the AI and the machine learning because it thinks like humans. That's the way it works. It is, you give it data, and human beings, when we give ourselves a lot of data and we need to come up with an answer, we make our best guess. And that's what Bayesian does. And then we use a technique, actually in your neck of the woods, Barb, out of the University of Chicago from the early 60s, called seemingly unrelated regressions. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to solve all of this very granular detail, all of this data all at once. And where we use AI in our process is that we have this like 4-step process that we process the data that it goes through to get to the final answer. And the final answer is, for each line item, for each day, what was the incremental impact that this line item has? For example, a campaign ad group keyword match type. What did it have an impact? And if so, how much money did it actually bring in? And how much money came in if we hadn't have done that type of thing? And that process would be one that would be typically done by humans. It would do step 1, it would stop, a human would look over it, would make some adjustments, and then it would start step 2. And step 2 would be done, and so on and so forth. And we trained an AI model to oversee that whole process. So instead of starting and stopping and having a human do it, we have the AI do it. So it allows us, once we've QA'd the data and it's put into the platform, to just let it run, and then it gets finished, which is pretty amazing. Typically in marketing mix models, what happens is you take all of this data at the channel level. It's not granular. And you model each channel separately, and then human beings go in and get rid of the stuff that doesn't make sense, the outliers. So you come up with a perfect, what we call R-square, a perfect predictive model. So on paper, it looks great. But our philosophy is that, we live in this world where all of this media is happening at once. So there's a network effect of all of this. We're not necessarily looking for the perfect best answer. We want to solve everything under real world conditions. And the AI allows us to do that in a time frame where we can take a lot of data and turn it around pretty fast. Now, these are old techniques, so we could have done this 10 years ago, but it would have taken us to take a month's worth of data. It would have taken us probably 6 or 7 months to do it. We can now take a year's worth of data and turn it around in 7 or 8 hours, which is pretty amazing.
So what type of customers are best suited to this approach that you're using at Provolytics? Like, for instance, can it work with smaller or mid-sized businesses, or do you have to have a certain level of scale in order to apply this approach?
Great question, Alec. It can work with any size marketer. The real key is for the cost that's involved, is there an ROI there? So marketers that are spending $2 million a year and up, you can definitely get ROI with our approach. And you're definitely gonna see that. Because remember, the first big win is, oh my God, half this stuff is not actually doing anything. It's like throwing money out the window. Let's redeploy that. So there's this huge kind of ROI boost. Most of our clients are spending upwards of 40 or 50 million or more per year. So the ROI there is ridiculous. It's significant for them. It's really, really substantial. But the same approach can work with even like a local florist who's spending $1,000 a month or $500 a month. And the idea behind it is, don't just be counting clicks, look at the impressions. Even if you're just spending in Meta, the tendency is to look at clicks and that click to sale, look at impressions, understand how many impressions every day are coming through, because that's your precursor to how many people you're actually reaching. And that's huge.
Yeah. I'm in love with case studies. So, and I'm glad you're starting to talk about ROI and some wins and those kinds of things. Can you paint us some pictures, just like the florist, and some, maybe even the larger and smaller contrast? So what can it mean to maybe $1 million or $2 million spender? And also, not everything is an ROI win, right? Some things are just a measurement win. So I would love to hear, just paint a picture of a couple of those big ideas or big case studies that are happening at Provolytics.
Yeah, I'd say one of the best examples of ROI these days, and we see this for clients that are spending, $2 million a year and even $150 million a year. And that is that most marketers are they're doing what they should be doing, which is they're not guessing, they're following the data. They're listening to Google Analytics following exactly what they should be doing, which is being data driven, if you will. But what we find is that they're way too heavily invested at that bottom of the funnel, just as we've been talking about. And so for one of our clients, what we found is that Google was telling them that their cost per sale, and they have an allowable where they should be spending around $300 per sale. If they come in around $300, they're profitable, they're making money. And Google was coming in saying, hey, our cost per sale is $90. Spend more. And when we actually looked at all of their media and did the whole marketing mix and looked at everything through Provolytics, it turns out that it wasn't that number. It wasn't 300. It was actually $3,300 per sale. So they were way over invested. And that was kind of a freak out moment, because you're in denial and you're saying, okay, well, maybe it's not. And our approach is always saying, listen, we're not right. We're definitely not right. Nobody's right. We believe we're less wrong than GA4, because we know GA4 is wrong. It's not taking into account anything. So the question is, do you think, we know that the cost of your paid search is somewhere between $95 and $3,300. Let's just assume that they're both wrong. It's not 95 and it's not 3,300. So where do we think it is? And of course, they think it's more like maybe 120. It's still below their allowable. And we think it's definitely above 1,000 to 2,000. So that's where some testing comes in. where we come to an agreement to cut one of the campaigns, just one, just a little bit, just enough to where they believe that it will have an impact on sales. And then they cut it, and then we wait. That's all they do. That's usually the first thing, is just cut. And then we wait. And we wait about a month to sometimes 2 months. And after cutting something, even just 10% after 2 months, and sales didn't go down, that's when people start to scratch their heads and say, oh my God, this is really freaky, because it challenges everything. But then you also think as a marketer, oh my God, am I going to get in trouble? Have I been doing the wrong thing? Then that fear comes in, and it's like, no, you've been following exactly what you should be doing, which is you had a methodology and you're following it. And then you did the right thing because you started to question it. And why they start to question is they start to spend more and sales don't go up because they reach that point of marginal return with paid search. And the funnel, there's not enough people you're reaching to actually make their way through in order for the numbers to actually work. So that's kind of the first thing, is being able to take those dollars and redeploy them. And for some of our clients, one that just off the top of my head was a large retailer, we were able to redeploy money for them. And in the next quarter, that translated into $3 million in additional profit for them. Profit.
Yeah.
So that's huge dollars just from doing a little bit of measurement work, which is pretty amazing. What's really exciting is also on the B2B side, on business to business, most people tend to forget in B2B that the people you're selling to are also consumers. And that's why you're seeing a lot of B2B ads on television and on radio, because they're trying to hit you wherever you are. But most B2B companies, they also have a separate sales force that's doing outbound calling, that's leaving voicemails, that's doing cold emails. And all of those activities you can actually bring into our type of model, because you can count how many phone calls connected with a person each day where they were able to mention the brand name, how many voicemails did they leave, how many emails were responded to. These are all impressions. And that's the greatest thing about this model. You can bring those in. You could also bring in events too. How many people were at the event? How many business cards did you collect? How many conversations did you have? All of these things can be tracked and brought into the model. It's pretty, very, very cool.
Yeah. I think some of the challenges, like, this widespread cost per sale that you mentioned, right, comes from some of the ways that that some of the channels actually report, right? In the old days, it was like direct mail was taking the credit for everybody because it could, it could actually match back the people you sent. And then all of a sudden it was like they were taking credit for, attribution that may or may not have been caused by them first or foremost or second or third. But so I love the way that you're doing this elimination diet, if you will, around advertising and trying to figure out really what it works. And I think that works the opposite way when you add, right? I was always trying to add in layering of different channels and seeing what kind of lift that we can get. Does it work that way as well, that you can just add different things?
Yeah, absolutely. See, that's the next step, is people want to invest more dollars, but the first thing we have to do is that even though we show the model predicts, it works, to get someone to go all in on all the recommendations. And essentially you're asking someone to, they've gone to one church service and you're asking them to convert to a new religion overnight. And that's just, you have to show them a couple of miracles first. Once you show them the miracle that you can cut spend on something that they know has an impact and it doesn't have an impact, then they're willing to maybe come to another service and give the new religion a try. Because the truth is we're talking about having a new source of truth within an organization. And that's the other thing. The only way this works is not to just replace GA4 with something like Provolytics for the marketing team. See, the problem with GA4 is that it's so embedded in organizations. We've seen across most of our clients, the CFO is aware of GA4, the CEO is. And the way that this works best is that this has to live internal. You have to make this something that everyone in the organization, all the way up to the C-level, looks at, and they get their eyeballs off of GA4. GA4 is web analytics only. It should not be marketing analytics. It is Google's analytics. It is not your analytics at all.
That's great advice right there. In another theme of returning to the future, back to the future, I wonder if this also leads us back into the importance of storytelling, brand, right? What's your view on that?
Oh, well, I think that there's been a huge mistake that brands made over the last couple of years, which is trying to appeal to folks with these TikTok ads. Just because people are addicted to these ads and these 6-second ads. And we saw this like a couple of Super Bowls ago where all the ads were like fast paced. And it's like, because that's what they think people want to see. And it took all the creativity out. Well, I could say it was creative that they came up with it, but they're just copying the trends, if you will, forgetting that the job of marketing and advertising is to build awareness and to influence, and not influence immediately, but over time. That concept of advertising ad stock, that your ads have both an immediate impact, but also a long-term lagged effect, which sometimes when you add up that long-term effect, it's actually greater than the immediate effect of every ad. And the key is being able to tell a story within 28 seconds that has appeal, that has emotion that's associated with it. Marketers have forgotten that this is not about having an offer and showing, the benefits to something. It's about having an emotional response to a product or a service and building a trust with the consumer. That's the key to selling. And those stories, I remember years ago, someone told me that the CMO of BMW was talking about their ads and how their ads were not to sell cars now. Their ads were geared towards 15-year-old boys so that when they were 40, that they would want to buy a BMW. And I thought, now, of course, in today's stock-driven world, if you're a CFO, money you spend this quarter has to have an impact this quarter. That's just the way of the world. But we need to start thinking about in terms of long-term impact and building that audience for long-term and that emotional component. There's tons and tons of studies out of the Advertising Research Foundation, the ARF, that talk about this connectivity that's there. And storytelling is great. That's why we're starting to see more and more brands move up funnel. And it's proven time and time again, the dollars that you spend in the upper part of the funnel will pay off 2-to-1 compared to any mid to lower funnel dollars. And so you have to have that balance, but storytelling is so important.
Yeah. I'm glad you talked about the balance because you know what? Oftentimes an owner or a CEO will say, how do I give you, 10 or $20 million and grow with that? Right. And it's like, you cannot keep drilling down on that mid funnel and lowering your cost per sale. That is not the way to growth most times. Right. And so, thinking about it as a balance is the right way to absolutely attack it. And I'm glad that we're also thinking about image a little bit more. I used to sell a lot of products to folks in those brand formative years, right? It was about aspiration and it was about connecting with a brand at, a deeper level, if you will. And that's why some of us are still buying BMWs probably. But anyway. Anyway, well, thank you. If people want to get a hold of Provolytics and learn more, Jeff, how should they get a hold of you?
The best thing is to go to provolytics.com. They can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll also throw out that, one of the things that we talked about today is all of the changes that are going on. And what that does for marketers is it kind of like your foundation feels like it's cracked or broken, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to have a solid foundation and understanding because this is not the last change that's going to happen. And the best thing you can do as a marketer is once you have a solid foundation and you've got your nose into things, you're going to be better able to handle what comes next and maybe even predict what the next big trend is or what happens next. So at Provolytics, we put together an attribution certification course. It's on the website. It's free. It's about an hour and a half. It talks about kind of the whole kind of what, the past, the present, and the future of advertising. And once you go through it, there's a little quiz and a certificate for you to share on LinkedIn. And there's no cost, no obligation whatsoever. If anyone's interested, they can check it out. It's right there on our website. There's a link that says attribution certification.
I think that's brilliant. We're all going to need that, right? And you're right. Change brings opportunity if that's the way you view it.
Definitely.
So, thanks so much for being with us today on the Marketing Share.
Thanks, Jeff.
It's been a pleasure, Alec and Barb. Thank you so much for having me.